From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Librarian of Congress, I'm happy to welcome you here for this wonderful program. I'm Carolyn Brown. I direct the Office of Scholarly Programs and the John W. Kluge Center here at the library. And this is going to be a particularly lovely occasion because our speaker, Dr. Louis Galambos, will be talking about his new book, The Creative Society and the Price Americans Paid for It. But he worked on this book when he was here in the Kluge Center. So we're always happy when our scholars return to talk about books that they have researched and thought about while they were here. Before we begin, let me ask you to please turn off your cell phones and anything else that will beep or bong or ring or sing, which may disturb the speaker and interfere with the recording. The lecture, really book talk we like to call these, is presented by the John W. Kluge Center, which was established by a very generous endowment from John W. Kluge in the year 2000 to create a scholarly venue here on Capitol Hill where mature scholars might have an opportunity to bring their wisdom to the nation's leaders, a space where the world of affairs and the world of ideas could meet, where the thinkers and doers could come together for mutually enriching conversation and to conduct research. And I will say, sometimes these conversations do happen and they can be really quite wonderful. The center also supports a rising generation of younger scholars, and we offer a number of public programs such as this book talk or lectures, small conferences, and other such events. Our speaker today, Dr. Louis Galambos, held the Cary and Maguire Chair in Ethics in American History in the Kluge Center back in 2005. Seems like a long time ago. The Maguire Chair, it was a gift of Cary Maguire, is a research position that explores the history of the United States with special attention to its ethical dimensions. The kinds of things that chairholders deal with are issues related to the conduct of politics and of government at all levels in American life and in all branches of government. Or it may bring attention to ethical dimensions of leadership in religion, business, urban affairs, law, science and medicine, and other aspects of American life. Today's lecturer, Louis Galambos, is a professor of history at Johns Hopkins University and is particularly well known as the editor of the papers of Dwight David Eisenhower, a project that occupied nearly 30 years of his life. Obviously, he wasn't doing only that, but it took a while, and it resulted in about 29 volumes. In addition to work on this massive project, Dr. Galambos has written extensively on U.S. business history, on business-government relations, on the economic aspects of modern institutional development in America, and on the rise of the bureaucratic state. His central issue in recent years has been on innovation in public and private organizations. And let me just mention the title of some of his recent books. It'll give you a kind of sense of that background and the kinds of issues that he's thought about and will be bringing together today in a new way. Among the titles, The Rise of the Corporate Commonwealth, U.S. Business and Public Policy in the 20th Century. The Fall of the Bell System, a study in prices and politics. Networks of Innovation, Vaccine Development at Merck, Sharp and Dome, and Mulford, 1895 to 1995. The Public Image of Big Business in America, 1880 to 1940, a quantitative study in social change. And this one, Anytime, Anywhere, Entrepreneurship and the Creation of a Wireless World. So you get, I think, a flavor of the kind of work that he has done, and the book he'll be talking about today comes out of that long-standing interest. But I want to note one further thing. When he sent me some notes in preparation for today's lecture, he said that he interjected into this book, and we'll see if he does it into the lecture, an element, and this is a word I'm going to use that's a really scary word in academic circles, some elements of fun. And of course, any of you in academia know that unless you're at a very senior level, highly accomplished, with a lot under your belt, fun is not one of the things that your tenure committee is going to want to hear about, so you don't really bring it in too much. But I know from having talked with Lou when he was here and subsequently that the things he'll have to tell us about parts of the world that we experience all the time, really corporations, bureaucracies, and much conversation about creativity and innovation, that you will find his comments of great interest and perhaps a little provocative, and maybe we'll even have some fun. So please welcome Louis Galambos.
I had to have some notes or I won't finish. Okay. There's the book. I always heard that men only know two colors, blue and off-white. So it's blue, in keeping with that. Thanks, Caroline. Those were nice, kind remarks. And thanks also to the Kluge Center for having this talk. I started my research, and actually, I mean really started it. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. I wrote a good application, I guess, or I wouldn't have been here. But it was very vague in my mind, and I just had a terrific time working here. And it was just an ideal place. It would have also been ideal to have it there, to be here the last years when I was finishing it, because I was then, I pretty much knew what I was going to do. So it was great to be here. The office was nice. They looked very comfortable, and I was able to stay awake. And you have all the books that you could possibly need, and I needed a lot of books. So all of that was great, but the real strength of the place was the people who were working here, and they just helped me an enormous amount. And so I was very grateful for having that kind of an environment where people are really friendly and they're helping you and they hustle books to you very quickly. And I've not forgotten all of that and all their kindnesses. Now, the results are here. I finished it in 2010. Okay. Those of you who are aspiring to write a book and have it published by a university press should be aware of this. I finished it in 2010. It's published in January of 2012. Okay. They're not fast. I'm working right now. I edit a number of series with Cambridge, and so I'm working right now with a junior scholar who is very anxious, and I telling him to slow down, okay? This is a university press, and they take their time. So in order today to finish in my time, I'm going to ask 5 questions, and I'll use these questions in order to get inside the book. And then I'll try to answer any questions that you have about anything. Since I'm covering 1890 to January of 2009, you've got to have a question, okay? And there must be something in that long period that will cause some concern. The first one is, why write a book that focuses on professionals and the process of professionalization as a central theme of modern American history? That's what the book is about. The book, instead of looking at it the way we usually do, I've kind of turned it sideways and said, if I'm looking at it from the vantage point of professionalization and professionals, how does the history look? Does it look different? Well, a lot of it does. So that's what holds the book together, and that's what I consider as the synthesis of the book. Now, the first part of the answer is that is based on all of my previous research, some of which Caroline mentioned. Everything that I researched and wrote led me in this direction. I've been teaching and researching and writing about America since the late 19th century for a long time, many decades. Early in the book, I tell you that I was born in April of 1931. Quick math, okay? I was born in 1931, so you've got that under control. So I have been teaching, I measure it now in decades, not in years, all right? Now, all of that research seemed to lead me in this way, this direction. The first course that I taught in, I was a teaching assistant at Yale in 1958. That was a course with, I don't know whether any of you have ever heard of the man, but that was a course with a man called Samuel Flagg Bemis, who was the master of diplomatic, what was then called diplomatic history. The students called him Samuel Wave the Flag Bemis because it was a very nationalistic course in which, among other things, he asked the students if any of them want to give back that land to Mexico. Does anybody want to give it back? California, Texas, all of that? No one ever dared raise their hand. He was a rather formidable man. So since that time, I've been working on various aspects of American history. Every corner I looked at, every place I looked at, and I worked on public institutions, I worked on private institutions, I worked on the nonprofit sector, and I was living in the nonprofit, what's called in America the nonprofit sector, or the NGO sector in some countries. Every place I looked, from the late 19th century on, the number of professionals was increasing. The process of professionalization was becoming more important to the institutions, and the leadership increasingly was professional. Now, that's a contrast with the 19th century, with certainly early 19th century. You had three major professions then. You had lawyers, okay, who dealt with your property, okay? You had the clergy, all right, who dealt with your soul, okay? And you had doctors who theoretically were supposed to keep you alive, all right? So they dealt with your life. So those are the three major professions. But if you look at things from the late 19th century on, there's just a tremendous increase in the number of professions, the number of professional schools, and the roles that these people play in our society. Now, we don't just have doctors, all right? We have, I just got a message from my daughter. I'm going to see an orthopedic surgeon tomorrow. She turned her ankle playing squash. We have people who do ankles. We have people who do hips. We have people who do knees, okay? Everything is specialized in our society. Orthopedic surgeons, okay, who concentrate on one thing. You go to a different specialist for almost everything, all right? And we complain about it, all right? We say, why don't we have more general practitioners? But when we want something done on our wrist, we will go to the specialist, all right? We go, if you're going to have brain surgery, you don't want to have it done by a GP, all right? So we continue to go to these specialists, and they seem to have an increasing role in our society. We have professionals who are in private practice, okay, but not many. Most of them now are in organized parts of our society. We have organizational professionals, the military, for instance. The military is very professionalized, who can really only practice in an institution, okay? So that they don't really have any life outside or career outside of that institution. We have administrators, public, private, nonprofit, okay? We have professionally trained teachers. There was a revolution in teaching at all levels, okay? K through 12, all right? Teaching in American cities. Every city you look at had some kind of really serious change beginning in the late 19th century, extending into the 20th, with professionalization of teaching. So we had degrees. You didn't just get a job anymore with political patronage. Teaching jobs were for your votes, traded for your votes in the 19th century. Now you had to actually go to school, get some kind of a license in order to teach. We have professionally trained administrators. One of my daughters got a PhD or an EDD in private school administration, okay? And that's amazing that you can be that specialized in our society. When I total them up for the current day, I get about 40 to 45 million people in America. 40 to 45 million people, all right, have some claim on professional standing in our society, okay? Now, that's an enormous number, and that's at the center of this book, okay? And that's the theme of this book, okay, is that that much of what we do is based on what they help us with, and many of the problems of our society are based upon what they do. They shape our society, and our society shapes them. Can you imagine Congress without lawyers? Can you imagine congressmen writing bills without lawyers who are specialists in writing bills? No. Okay? I know some of these people who actually write the bills for the congressman. Right? So it's the same wherever you look. Can you imagine my university, Johns Hopkins, without biologists, biochemists, astrophysicists, and historians? Historians who don't do everything, we specialize. So I work on America, okay? But I don't do anything on Afghanistan, all right, until Americans become involved there. We'll talk about that a little bit, okay? So that's the first part of my answer, is that every place you look in our society, it's professionalized, and the leadership in particular is professionalized. The second part of the answer is a little trickier. Having decided to write this book, okay, why organize it around four, and that's the way it's organized, around four central problems that Americans faced in the years since the 1890s. And the problems are, I'll tell you, learning to live in cities. What you have to understand is that Americans didn't live in cities, okay, for a long time. Hardly any of them did, okay? But we experienced very rapid urbanization from the 19th century into the 20th. As late as 1940, we had 57 million people living in the countryside or in towns, tiny towns of 2,500 or less. That's really small. I come from a small town. I spent most of my youth in a small town, and that was 7,000. I think they counted some animals to get up to 7,000. They were kind of proud of that number. But I thought that was tiny. And the first house that we lived in Princeton, Indiana, not New Jersey, Princeton, Indiana. Okay, Princeton, New Jersey is where millionaires live. Princeton, Indiana was where people who were pharmacists, maybe at best, okay? But there was a lot of countryside around there. You went 2 blocks and you were in a cornfield. Okay, so it was a small place. Well, 17 million in 1940 were living in towns under 10,000, okay, in population. So this was a tremendous transition to move into cities, and more Americans moved into cities. People worried about this in agriculture. People in farming wanted to keep people on the farm. They created organizations just to help train people and keep them on the farm. They created A&M colleges, agricultural and mechanical colleges, and they sent their sons and daughters to those colleges, and where did they go after they went to the A&M college? They went to the city, okay? Maybe they didn't want to work 7 days a week on the farm. You know, farm animals are like kids. They don't go away, okay? You don't have a day off on Sunday with farm animals. So at any rate, this process has continued, and it seemed to me that part of the American experience was learning how to live in cities and how to control cities, okay? So this was a major problem. I thought also at the same time we were gaining a great deal of power By the 1890s, we were the major industrial power in the world in terms of output, okay? And we had to learn how to exercise that power. It wasn't obvious. We began to acquire an American overseas empire. We don't like to think we have an empire. Some of my students say, we don't have an empire. I ask them, where did you do your vacation? In Puerto Rico? Oh, Puerto Rico. Did they speak another language there in Puerto Rico? How do you think we got Puerto Rico? Or I ask them, do you know where the Ladrone Islands are? And they say, no, I've never heard of that. And I said, well, the military's heard of that, okay? And we acquired the Ladrone Islands. How do you think we got those? We're in a major state of denial about the exercise of power. But we began to exercise it, and I remind them of this repeatedly. So we had to learn how to do that, okay? We also had to learn how to remain. We had been extremely innovative and efficient, okay? It was a great transition that came, okay, into the second, what's called usually the second industrial revolution, which is a revolution associated with electricity, chemicals, electrochemicals, standardization, the Ford Motor Company, that sort of thing. We had to learn how to maintain efficiency because our growth increasingly in the 20th century depended not upon new inputs, new resources, new cash, it depended upon productivity. And productivity is not production, productivity is efficiency. We had to remain innovative and efficient to remain in a leadership position in the world. And that was not easy, all right? Not every country makes these transitions. This was a major transition for America. At the same time, there was increasing demand in an urban industrial society to provide a greater measure of equity and security, economic security among others. This is a major concern right now. Questions of equity are all over your newspaper, if you still read a newspaper. They're all over your computer if you get your information that way. So questions of equity, questions of security, how were people going to be secure, okay, in this kind of society? Because it was a new kind of society. It was urban, industrial, okay, a different sort. Now, why these four? Okay, well, the answer is that every other major problem that I could think of would not push the four off of the table, okay? So I had four, and if you can think of one, I can think of a lot: the environment, okay, our relationship to the environment, racial problems in our society, but I still can't push these out of their leadership position in terms of the problem the society faced. Now, this is a very professional, very intelligent audience, and you have already thought of the next question. The next question is, why limit yourself to four? Right? Okay, that's it, all right. Well, here's the answer. First, I had about 120 years to cover, okay? And I was going to do it in one book, all right? I had 120 years. I had determined it would not be the books that I read in business history, which are called chest crushers. You're reading them at night on the bed, and boom, they come down on top of you, okay? These are these 1,000, 1,100 page books. They're chest crushers. And I wasn't going to write that, okay? I gave myself arbitrarily a limit of 100,000 words. That was it. If I couldn't do it in that, I wasn't going to do it, okay? So I was going to write a study that would use 100,000 words to capture what I wanted in American history. Now, there's another answer to the question, because once you set up a structure like this, you can depend upon the academic process. When you set up a structure, then that encourages students to say that you're wrong, okay? So they make a reputation by attacking you, and they explore each of the subjects that you didn't do, okay? And I knew that process would go on. It's already started, okay? I'm stunned, but there are already used copies of the book for sale, and this is a little soon, you know. It just came out in January, but you can get a used copy on Amazon.com for 14 bucks, and so I looked it up myself. But I knew that the students and the reviewers would fill in the hole. I talked with a panel discussion at the Policy History Conference in Richmond, Virginia, just last week, and indeed, they started that process. They already started the grinding that's going to go on. So that's wonderful. That's how academic life works, and that's what I would like to see. Third was I wanted to write a book that people who are not historians, not academics, would be able to read and afford, okay? So I had that limit on myself. As I said, you can get it for $12 on Kindle right now, all right, from Amazon.com. So one of my former students has corresponded with me about the book, and he said, well, if I really wanted a lot of people to read it, I'd change the title. He suggested instead of the Creative Society and the price Americans paid for it, I should have called it the Professional Power Grab! Exclamation point. How experts are destroying democracy. Now, okay, big letters, maybe a black background with red letters, okay. I had to tell him that Cambridge University Press wouldn't buy that, and I'd have to publish it with a different title. But there are tensions, and I've tried to deal with those between democracy and expertise, and I discuss those throughout the book. Okay. Now, that was all an answer to question 1. Okay, we got more questions to go, all right? So that was a question 1 in 2 or 3 stages. Question 2 is why I did what Caroline suggested. Why did I put myself and my own family in the book? Okay, and there are 3 answers to that question. The first one is the one she said. It was fun to put my family in the book and find out where they fitted in history. I did a lot of digging. It's not hard sometimes to find out where your family came from and what they did. And I know you're not supposed to have fun. Professionals are supposed to be deadly serious. The more ideologically intense they are, the more serious they become. But I really enjoyed tracking my father's side of the family, which is Hungarian-American. All of you who are Hungarian-Americans know right away that Galambos is not a Greek name. It is a Greek ending because when you come into America, they change your name. They turn it into something they can write down. Okay, so Galambos, which would be, if you were Hungarian, you'd raise your finger and say, Galambos. Okay, and the root of the word means pigeon or bird, like column, Columbus, same thing, same word, root word. So the Hungarian-American side was the Galamboses, and on the other side was the German-Americans, who were Himbergs from northern Germany, okay? If you're sensing a cultural clash, indeed, it was part of my life, okay? And so that was one of the reasons that it was a lot of fun. And dealing with my rather formidable 250-pound father and my very well-organized German-American. If you're sensing a stereotype, that's true, but it was in my family, okay, mother. Second, I used my family because it put a thread through the book. It put a thread, a kind of personal thread that runs through the history and tightens the storyline up for people who don't like TION words. Latinisms are the common stuff of academic life, but a lot of people like to read People magazine. And so I peopled the book. Now, I thought I had in mind the idea that academics might use the book. It's already been used in one course, and encourage their students to put their own families in the history. And everybody who's read it has put their family in the history and commented on it when they read it for me. And I thought that would be fun for them and for the teachers as well. That's already started to happen. As I said, I've already got some comments from students, one of whom wanted to know from his professor, why indeed should he find out about people named Galambos? Why? What are they doing in history? Okay, he knew Woodrow Wilson, but he wondered about Galambos. Okay, so it's fun to see this happening and see it as sort of a process of teaching and learning. Then also, I had a lot of other people in the book. Okay, they're not just my own. Many of them may not be familiar to you. Michael Pupin, for instance, he was a Serbian who made it in America, made a very important discovery, made a whole lot of money with his important discovery. And so he's one of the people in the book. And then Richard Kelly. Does anybody remember Richard Kelly? Well, Richard Kelly was on television. They had a video of him stuffing $25,000 bribe in his pocket. It's a marvelous video, okay, from one of the earlier scandals, all right? So he made it into the book, all right? I don't just deal with the creative part, although bribery you might look on as a creative process, okay? But he was stuffing it in his pocket. It's a marvelous story. Henry Kissinger, whose bust is out in the Kluge Center, okay, he makes it into the book. Some of you are allowed to go, yay. Some may go, yes. Kissinger is a very controversial person. Woodrow Wilson, okay, maybe yeah. I don't know. I have mixed views about Wilson. I like his domestic policy and hate his foreign policy, okay. So I wanted the history peopled with professionals and quasi-professionals, including some Galamboses. If you read the book carefully, you'll even find there the daughter of my cleaning lady, a terrific graduate of a KIPP school. How many of you know what KIPP is? Knowledge, okay, Knowledge is Power program. It's a middle school program, okay, to improve teaching in our schools. KIPP, she's a graduate of KIPP. Last year, she got her mother is an unregistered immigrant, and she got a $50,000 scholarship to go to a New England boarding school. Marvelous story, okay? So I got stories like that, all right? Now, those are the people in the book, which brings me to question 4. Brings me to question 4. Or question 3, I guess I'm still just on 3. I've only made it to 3 at this point. That brings me to a self-evaluation of the book, okay? And I want to start out by saying what the book doesn't do, okay? So you've been warned, all right, by the author, all right? From my point of view, the big thing that's missing in the book is emotion. Professionals, as I said, they're not supposed to have fun. There's not as much emotion in the conflict. There's not as much emotion in the social and political conflict. There's not much of that in the book, okay? Now, on the subject of conflict, I didn't do as much as I could have done with conflict, and that's already been pointed out in Richmond, all right, that I've set these professions up, and now we can go on and deal with the way they struggled against each other. And I love that story. I teach that. Doctors and nurses, the struggle over the hospital. The American hospital is controlled by the doctors, all right? And they control the nurses, okay? But they have a lot of work to do, and there's a lot to be done. And so the nurses do more and more. And you can see a quiet sort of daily struggle that goes on, okay, over professional activity like that. The doctors have usually won, but I think right now they're losing, okay? They're losing out simply because there's so much to do and so much pressure on cutting costs, all right? I don't know whether, I know I should not have a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old daughter, but I do. I have 4 daughters, 1 granddaughter, and a female dog, so I know how to take orders. I take my daughters to the pediatrician, and now increasingly it's a nurse practitioner and not the doctor that sees my daughters. Now, that's going on through the whole society. So you're getting a kind of quiet shift in functions that will ultimately be a shift in power, okay? So those kind of changes take place throughout the society. And I could do 100 more, okay? The struggle over who would treat our emotional and intellectual problems. It's not obvious. Should it be psychologists? Well, I don't know. Yeah, that's what they study. Should it be psychiatrists? Other clinicians? You know, it's not obvious. These things come out of intense, long social and political struggles and economic struggles. A lot more of this, I think, will be added to the structure if it works by subsequent scholars. And some of you could probably do that from your own life experiences. Compared to progressive or liberal history, it's not always obvious in my book who the heroes are and who the villains are, okay? You don't always have a fix on that, all right? And that may bother some readers. Some readers like to have their heroes really identified, and they're always good, okay? And some of them like to have their villains clearly identified, all right? And that may bother some readers. Progressive or liberal history, which is probably the textbook that you read in middle school and in high school or upper school. Progressive or liberal history, it seems to me, stresses kind of creative political conflict with clearly identified heroes and villains that leads to legislative victories, and then the history stops. As if there is no administration, no bureaucracy, nothing that's being done on the regulations by the lawyers working privately. So it is a triumph of democracy in that history. Now, I do some of that. Clearly, there's a reason. I talked about us having a measure of equity and security. That comes out of our welfare state, okay? Clearly, there's a reason, and there are reasons why the welfare state grew more slowly in America than in Britain or Germany. There's a reason why we give every shareholder in our corporations a vote and other countries don't. These kind of issues and tensions are in the book, but they're not the central theme of our modern history. I'm more interested in the lawyers who work out the compromises, who cut the deals so something can get done. And I hope that process is working right now, okay? In America, we need a lot done very quickly. Now, in discussing bureaucracy, I don't see bureaucracy as an insurmountable problem, okay? In fact, it's the only way you can organize, I'm with Max Weber on this, it's the only way you can organize large groups of people effectively. And so bureaucracy is an aspect of our lives, whether we work in Washington, whether we work in Baltimore, whether we're in a university. In my university, bureaucratization began in the gymnasium and then spread to the rest of the university while I was there. We had virtually no bureaucracy at Hopkins for a long time. We have a rather formidable one now. We're going to have bureaucracy, so what we need to do is make certain that democracy continues to control it, and that's not always easy. Now, as this suggests, I'm a great fan of our democratic system. I believe it still works, and some of my readers will object to that, but I agree with Churchill in this regard. He said democracy is a terrible system, okay, but we just haven't found anything that's better. That's the problem. So I don't see anything that's better, okay? As that suggests, the book has a happy ending in 2009, okay? It has a happy ending given the state of the economy. That may astound you, but I do see the glass as half full, okay? I have a tendency to see it half full all of the time. I have a bias in that direction. I was born, I told you, in 1931 in one of the worst years in the American economy. It had to get better. Things had to go up, okay? So I sensed that. I came into the academic profession when it was experiencing its great expansion. So, I mean, I always warn my students to put an asterisk on my evaluations because I am incredibly optimistic about life, and I am about America. Now, what do I think I accomplished with the book? Well, I think it gives us, it seems to me, a handle on just how important, how tremendously important education and the role of education is at all levels of our society. A major theme in the book is the ladder. That's why the ladder's on the front, because that's how you make it in America. You get on the ladder, and that's a process of education, okay? The price, what's the price? Well, we kept more than half of our population off the ladder for a long time, okay? I see that as a central change in our society since the 1890s. You know, it hasn't been so long ago that the only reason women could be admitted to the Johns Hopkins Medical School was because a woman who had some money held out and said she wasn't going to give them the money until they admitted women, okay? So they saw the principle. They suddenly saw the principle. The principle was $500,000, which they needed really badly, okay? So they opened up access in that way. And this is a very important process that's taken place in our society, is the opening up of our society, and particularly that ladder that brings you up society through professionalization. The book also, I think, helps us understand how contingent our power and wealth are, okay, as we went through these two major transitions, one at the latter part of the 19th and the early 20th century, as we moved into a new type of economy and an urban society, and then one since the Second World War. We've undergone a major transition from the 1970s, certainly the late 60s actually, on through the 70s and into the 80s, a major transition in our society. And we could have failed. In those transitions, a lot of societies don't make it. Okay, I could go through the history of that, all right? It is a history that's very important to those societies. So our power and wealth are contingent, and we should think about that. There are a lot of opportunities for society, just like individuals, to fail. I think also I tried throughout the book to take professional history and American history beyond the East Coast. I'd like to say something about Middle America, and I did, as well as the West, and then what the Wall Street Journal calls the left coast, that is the Pacific side of America. I even devoted some pages to South Dakota. Anybody here from South Dakota? No. Okay, it gets left out of history. It makes me worry that things like South Dakota get left out like they're not part of America, okay? So I brought those back in and talked about education in South Dakota and how the system changed, all right, and who they were trying to imitate. Now, another thing that I tried to do really hard in the book is synthesize, bring together domestic and foreign policy. Usually they're dealt with by two specialists, one who does foreign policy and one who does domestic policy, okay? So I tried to bring those together and write one history, okay, that has both foreign policy elements and domestic policy elements. Now, the other thing I think that the book does is it helps us see how our political discourse has changed over the last 100 or so years. It's now become increasingly a professional discourse, for better or worse. You have to have professional credentials very often to play in the political discourse. As Caroline pointed out, I did some work on the Bell system and the breakup of the Bell system, and there was a marvelous moment where Charlie Brown, who was the CEO of AT&T, at that time the largest private corporation in the world, was sitting down and trying to discuss with a staff member from Congress the 4S switch. Now, there's not anyone in the room that knows what a 4S switch is, my guess is, but it was absolutely essential to the telephone system. They were deciding how to break it up. She had no idea. So here's the conflict between Charlie Brown, who's a second-generation telephone person who had all the technical knowledge, and then a staffer who ultimately had the power, okay? And they were trying to bring those two together, okay? It was a beautiful sort of example of what I'm talking about power and knowledge in a society that is increasingly professional. Finally, I think the book links power and wealth to cultural and ethical values and deals with some of the problems Americans have had with linking them. In foreign policy, we're all too quick, it seems to me, to think about national security and not about our basic democratic values. There's a tension always, a tension between what we want to do for national security and what we think we ought to do, given our democratic society. You know the examples from the present day. You know the examples of the drone killing an American citizen, okay, without a trial in another country. This is a question. We need to think about these things, okay? We've had a struggle for 100 years between realists and idealists in our foreign policy, okay? And I try to chart how those struggles went on and what happened. It's important, it seems to me, to remember that an emphasis upon ethical behavior has always been an aspect of professional life. It doesn't mean that professionals are always ethical. It means it is a part of their professional life and of professionalization. In the years since 1945, we have had good reason frequently to question the ethics of the professions. And that, too, is a subject in the book and a subject we could discuss. Now, that's what I've tried to do. And as I said, I'm grateful to the Kluge Center and the Library of Congress for helping me do it. And now I'm ready to answer anything you want to ask. Thank you. This is a high class, okay, professional audience, and I expect some really good questions, okay? The pressure's on you now. Yes, Caroline. There you go.
Yeah, I was particularly interested in, well, you talked about tensions and
Flip it, can you?
should be on.
That's me. Did you blow? No, it's not on. It's lying.
It's lying, right. Well,
This is why I don't use PowerPoint, okay? I don't want to spend 15 minutes trying to get straightened out with the PowerPoint. We're working on it. There's going to be... Come up here and ask your question. There you go, see?
yeah, I was hoping you could say something more about the tension between democracy and expertise, because it seems to be, maybe it's just my misreading of the newspapers, but it seems to be very current at the moment. And I'm wondering to what extent it's a historical phenomenon, to what extent it's inevitable in democracies, to what extent it seems unique, or the degree of it unique to this democracy.
It is a problem built in to the two needs. One need is to have a democratic society in which everyone has one vote, everyone who's allowed to vote has one vote, and the nature of expertise, which suggests to you that complex technical decisions should be made by experts. Now, if you want to see where it's on display, it's in part in the school system. How much involvement should there be? We had a marvelous dissertation done on this. How much involvement should there be in the local public schools by the parents? And how much should be controlled by the teachers, and how much by the administrators? Now, if you can work that problem out in your mind, you probably know where you stand on questions like this. When the student who was doing the dissertation raised the question in our seminar, Professor Hyam, the late Professor Hyam, a distinguished American historian, said, "What do you mean? Of course the decisions have to be made by the professionals." Is that true? I'm not certain. We've been struggling with this problem from the late 19th century on, and it continues like a thread right through our history. All right, should we turn over the regulation of our essential industries to experts, lawyers with experience in the field? Okay. Should it be controlled democratically? Oh, that's partisan politics. Oops. Okay, you see how the issues come up out of the. You don't think about them. You don't think about them much. We're trained as professionals to think that professional conclusions are good and maybe best, but there's a tension built in there with our democratic system, and that tension won't go away. Okay, it's one of the things that I think. that we have elected officials for, that we have, for instance, we have highly professionalized military leadership, but we want to keep it under democratic control, under political control. There's a reason for that, okay? It's a tremendous exercise of power, and we want to keep that under democratic control. It's very hard for presidents to, all the Joint Chiefs come in with all that stuff on their coats, and it's intimidating to a president who doesn't have a lot of military experience, I think. It always is. And it's a problem in our society. We have to respect the expert, and at the same time, we have to try to preserve democratic control. It won't go away. This is a problem today, just like it was in 1890. It was a problem the courts struggled with. Are we going to take issues out of the hands of us, the jurists? Are we going to let them be decided by experts, and they won't be subject to court approval? Or will the courts take hold of the issue and spend 4 years trying to decide what to do, okay? The judicial process is slow. The regulatory process can be a lot faster, okay, under certain circumstances. But that won't go away. That's a problem of our society. Has the balance changed? Oh, yes, the balance has shifted toward expert opinion. Experts in how are we going to deal with with nuclear power? All right, should that be a democratic process? No, it shifted more and more. These processes shift more and more into the hands of the experts. So the long-run trend has been for expert professional power and standing to increase, and that creates more and more tension over time with democracy. Yes, right here, yes.
Thank you. Yeah, just to add on this question, what I've seen as one of the major problems lately is that the professionalization and globalization of the financial markets have steered us all worldwide to a point where I think for the first time in history, the politicians, even if they try really hard, cannot understand the matters anymore. Because like with the crisis of the euro now, you have financial experts. Exactly.
I wore my Euro tie today, okay?
Yeah. You have these
yes.
financial experts who totally disagree on, what measure to take. And so the politicians can't possibly grasp what is the right way to choose. So, and then as the voter, you are left at a loss of what to do.
Yes, that's right.
So what can one do about this?
The issues are more and more difficult as you get into those technical questions. I always ask my students early in the class, do you know what a derivative derives from? And they stare at me like sheep, okay? No, we don't know much about derivatives. We don't know who's hedging what in a hedge fund. We're not certain, okay, about whether we really do want nuclear energy or not, and what the cost of it will be. So it has created more, as I suggest, more and more of a problem, and it's a problem for the political leaders too. Now, one of the responses of the political leaders has been to add staff with technical ability, all right? So the woman who was being educated by Charlie Brown, okay, the CEO, she was a staff person with a good education, and she developed tremendous expertise over time as a learning process, as she learned about this giant, the biggest telecommunications system in the world at that time. So that's one of the responses on the part, say, of legislatures to just what you said. How do I deal with these questions where I don't have the technical knowledge myself? This came out very clearly, I think, in the healthcare legislation. It has come out very strongly since the Second World War. A lot of healthcare legislation is very difficult, I think, for people in the legislature to understand. And these are complex questions. and what you expect them to do is two things, it seems to me. One is to get as much technical input as they can and then exercise good judgment. They have to exercise judgment at the end on these questions, even those complex questions about finance. And they're doing that, I think. I see that happening. They're forced to the wall in some cases, and forced out of office in other cases. So we're watching that process go on. Okay?
Thank you very much. I have a question related to that, which relates to creativity, because you call it the creative society. Is this experts that are coming up? They're very specialized and focused on these certain issues, but they maybe also lack a little bit in creativity because they are very focused on this one, and it's harder for them to communicate with other groups of experts, which might also kind of make it harder to be creative. Okay. And related to that, I was wondering, is that actually an American story that you're telling, or are these issues that you identified very much present all over the world and other societies that maybe reacted differently to those challenges?
These are global issues, and I'm not doing global history, but I teach a course called Global Public Health Since World War II, and I'm very interested in the professions themselves tend everywhere to be organized along national lines. The content of their knowledge tends to be international. If you're doing work in microbiology now, you're in an international arena, and your work is judged internationally. The flow of information is international. There are no boundaries in scientific fields like this. But the professions themselves, now the EU right now is trying to struggle with that question. Should we allow a professional doctor trained in Hungary to come to Britain or to come to France and practice? Okay, so this is a tough question. They're dealing with it right now politically. What are you going to do about this kind of question? It is a continuing problem. It's a global problem. There's no getting away from it. The second and the third industrial, now the digital revolution has taken place, and we're all in this sense, in the sense of my book, we're all on that same page. And the interaction, the manner in which we've created a global economy by political choice, by political fiat, we decided that the nationalism that caused the Second World War should be done away with. We should create a more global system. 83 million people killed. That's the rough number from the Second World War. We don't want that again, so we're trying now to globalize, and it makes those problems move very quickly from country to country, and as we've discovered, through the whole world. So does that answer your question? Is that what you... And to creativity, to be creative now in these subdisciplines requires a tremendous focus. All right, the whole idea of the Renaissance person, I mean, is really a nice idea, but I just dealt with 4 questions, and that was a lot in American history. The volume of material that's coming out in the disciplines does turn your focus in, and that is one of the problems of you get greater creativity, okay? We get new innovations. We live longer as a result of those innovations in medicine, let's say. At the same time, we lose something because we lose interaction between these creative people, because there are boundaries. They don't very often read outside of their boundaries. They don't think outside of their boundaries, okay? And that's why we need political leaders, okay, who don't have those boundaries. So when you let professionals control things, okay, you have a problem. That creates a problem.
We've talked about globalization, and you used the word earlier during the talk of contingency. Do you have any nice examples of foreign solutions to these problems that are different from what we've created in this country?
Oh, yes.
What are good examples that one could tuck away in one's pocket when the subject comes up?
Well, the law, for instance, works differently in each country, and legal training is different. And so there's now increasing interaction between lawyers trying to work out problems internationally or globally, but in fact they come at it from different knowledge base, all right, and different traditional practices. Is that what you mean? Yes, yes. They're just different ways to handle the law, and that differs from society to society. So it seems to me that that's probably an example of what you're asking about. I would say there is a difference in a very large society and a very small society. We're a very large society, and we tend to deal with these problems by breaking them off and creating a special agencies or organizations that handle them. In relatively small societies, there's a lot more interaction across those boundaries, and you find people discussing these problems and moving back and forth so that there's a lot more fluidity. There used to be more fluidity in our society, but now if you look at the university system, universities now they have lawyers patrolling the boundaries of the university, okay, worrying about intellectual property. Well, that wasn't true not too long ago. We didn't have university lawyers or a whole legal department creating contracts for people and being certain that the university's stake in it was preserved. So we had a lot more fluidity in our society. Our society, as things like this happen, becomes a little bit more rigid over time, all right? And that there may be a point where that will hurt us. We don't know where that point is, all right? That's the kind of problem that you're talking about? Okay, yes.
Hi, I have two questions. Number one, there seems to be a current trend in American politics and political rhetoric that denigrates experts and bureaucracies and regulations, and I just wondered if you care to comment on that. And then my second question has to do with your point that education is the ladder. And how would you like to comment on the rising cost of education, especially higher education, and how that will affect the continued life of professionals in the United States?
Well, I'll take the last question first. I'm very worried about access to education at all levels in our society. I'm particularly worried about it in urban America, where I live in Baltimore, the city of the wire. Some of you may have seen that. It's a city in which we have a lot of trouble. We have somebody trying to fix that trouble, but a lot of conflict over that right now. So where the base is particularly weak, I think, is in K through 12 in urban America. Some cities have been better at solving that problem than others, but we're still struggling over that problem, and it's going to go on. It's going to go on for some time. So I'm worried about that, and you're probably thinking in terms of cost of higher education, and yes, higher education still pays off. It still pays off over the long term of your career, but you have people sinking in debt, all right? I know some of these people myself, and it is a problem for our society. One of the sort of quiet changes that's taken place has been the shift of budgets from teaching and research to administration. It's gone on since 1945, and one of the responses is to cheapen teaching. And they cheapen teaching by exploiting the great the lumpen proletariat, our ABDs, all but dissertation. Okay? The ABDs are out there teaching in 3 different schools, teaching 180 people every week, grading papers every week, because it's cheaper. So we exploit people in the teaching system in the universities that proclaim themselves as great defenders of sort of a liberal view of humanity, and that are the big exploiters in this case. So that's a problem. And right now, if you ask me, I have no solution to that problem, okay? I can't tell you that I think there will be a reaction against it. I think that's bubbling up. And when I speak of bubbling up, I can get to your first question, and that is that there is a normal democratic process in which people react against things like bureaucracy. They react against regulation when they see examples of, and this is political capital. You can make political capital by showing examples of where regulators have been, heavy-handed, where they've lost sight of what their major objectives are. There's a little book called The Death of Common Sense, which goes through a series of these examples and shows you how that process works. So there's political capital in that, and that's a good democratic process. So I applaud that kind of conflict and that kind of tension and those kinds of questions. So I'm quite happy with that, and I think the outcome in the long run will probably be good. So I think we ought to be asking those questions. Thank you.
Okay, well, that's good timing. We're actually 10 past the hour, a little further than we like to go. But please, if you would, thank our speaker and then join us for further informal conversation at a reception. Thank you very much, Lou.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.